So, imagine you are like walking on a tightrope. You've got your balance right. You're looking straight ahead. You are, moving through your life with this very predictable rhythm. Everything makes sense.
Right, just putting one foot in front of the other.
Exactly. And then without literally any warning, the rope just snaps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are just in free fall. You don't know where the ground is. You have no idea how fast you're falling, and air is rushing past you in this deafening roar.
It's terrifying.
It is, and that profound, completely disorienting terror. That is what human grief actually feels like when you lose someone who is just, well, central to your universe.
It really is absolute free fall. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And, the tragedy of how our modern society handles that free fall is, well, it's honestly terrible.
It is.
We basically stand at the edge of the cliff, look down at the person plummeting, and yell, hey, try to land on your feet in about 3 to 5 business days.
Right. Take your bereavement leave and get back to it.
Exactly. We have constructed this culture that fundamentally treats grief as like an inefficiency.
A glitch.
Yeah, psychological glitch that needs to be patched, or an injury that requires a quick cast so the person can just resume their normal economic productivity.
It is maddening. I mean, we hand grieving people this timeline.
A completely artificial timeline.
Right. We expect a neat linear progression, stage 1, stage 2, and then you're cured. But anyone who has actually been in that free fall knows that the emotional and psychological landscape of profound loss, it just does not map onto a neat timeline.
No, it doesn't at all.
There is no simple cast you can put on a shattered reality.
There really isn't. And the modern kind of secular approach often leaves the mourner incredibly isolated.
Yeah.
Because the underlying assumption there is that death is simply a termination.
A full stop.
Exactly. A sudden, permanent nothingness. And if the person is just gone, erased, there's really nothing left for the mourner to do except eventually get used to the void.
Which is exactly why we need to completely upend that conversation today. So welcome to this deep dive on the Funeral Channel Network.
Thanks for having me.
If you are joining us, whether you are, currently navigating your own free fall or maybe trying to support someone who is, or even if you are just profoundly curious about how humanity processes the most agonizing parts of life, you are definitely in the right place.
Absolutely.
Because we are going to explore an entirely different architecture for handling loss.
Yeah, we are stepping far, far outside the modern clinical approach today.
We really are.
We're going to examine how one of the world's oldest and most deeply established traditions processes this human experience of sorrow.
Right.
And how it weaves together theology, psychology, and these built-in community structures to literally catch the person who is falling.
So our mission today is to explore the Catholic perspectives on death, grief, and eternal life. And we are drawing our insights from a really comprehensive document we've been analyzing.
It's titled CatholicFaithGrief.pdf.
Yes, and this serves as a sort of welcoming exploration into the themes covered by this network. Specifically, we're looking at how practical resources like those provided by the funeral program site are used to actually implement these ancient concepts in the real world.
And what is genuinely fascinating about this specific framework is that it doesn't offer, hollow platitudes.
Right, no toxic positivity here.
Exactly. It doesn't tell the mourner to simply cheer up or move on.
Thank goodness.
I know, right? Instead, it presents a highly structured, emotionally intelligent paradigm. It fully acknowledges the devastation of the loss, but it uses faith to shift the ultimate trajectory from unadulterated despair into a very active, enduring form of hope.
So let's jump right into the deep end here. Because the very first massive shift this document presents, it fundamentally changes the definition of death itself.
It really does.
In our modern, purely secular viewpoint, death is the absolute end. I mean, if life is a biological machine, death is when the power gets permanently cut.
The screen goes black.
The screen goes black, exactly. But this Catholic framework completely rejects the idea of termination, doesn't it?
It completely upends it. The core paradigm shift here is the movement from termination to transition.
Transition.
Yeah. At the absolute bedrock of this theology is the conviction that the human soul is immortal.
Okay.
So yes, the biological vessel, the physical body fails, it passes away. But the soul, which this tradition views as the eternal animating core of who that person actually is, does not cease to exist.
And keeps going.
It continues to live in the presence of God. So death is explicitly defined not as a final ending, but as a severe, profound transition into a new state of existence.
Transition rather than a termination. I want to really linger on that for a minute
Sure.
because the psychological weight of that distinction is just staggering. Let's think about the architecture of the grieving mind for a second.
Okay, let's unpack that.
If I truly believe that death is the absolute termination of a person's existence, that they have been entirely erased from the cosmos, then my grief is anchored in permanent, unending absence.
Right. It's a black hole.
Exactly. That is an incredibly heavy, almost unbearable psychological load to carry around.
It creates a state of absolute finality. I mean, if death is pure termination, then the work of grief is essentially the brutal process of learning how to inhabit a permanent void.
You just have to get used to the emptiness.
Exactly. You are forced to reconcile with a universe where that person will simply never exist again.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But when the definition shifts to a transition, the internal landscape of the mourner fundamentally changes. The person hasn't been erased.
Right, they've just relocated.
Relocated. They exist differently. And this framework provides a profound structural comfort because it insists the loved one still is. They have being.
It makes me think of the metamorphosis of a caterpillar.
Oh, that's a classic analogy.
Right, like if you are another caterpillar watching your friend wrap themselves up in a chrysalis, and you only understand the world through the lens of being a crawling insect, that chrysalis looks like a tomb.
Totally. It looks like the end.
It looks like the end of their existence. You think they are just gone. But biologically, that chrysalis is an engine of transition.
Right.
They haven't ceased to exist. They are changing states to inhabit the sky instead of the dirt.
That is a very helpful way to visualize it. But I would add, a layer of nuance to that analogy from the text.
Well, please do.
Because the metamorphosis isn't just a biological upgrade in this theological framework. It's a transition into an eternal reality.
Okay, right.
So the sky, in your analogy, is the actual presence of the divine. The loved one hasn't just changed shape. They have crossed an ontological threshold.
That's a big word, ontological.
Sorry. It just means the nature of their being is shifted. They are now experiencing reality in its ultimate unclouded form.
Okay, let me pause and inject some skepticism here.
Go for it.
Because I want to represent the listener who might be currently sitting in the middle of a really profound loss right now.
Absolutely valid.
Because it is incredibly easy, almost dangerously easy, honestly, for a well-meaning person to walk up to a grieving widow at a funeral and say, "Oh, don't cry, he's in a better place now, he's a butterfly."
Right. And that can feel so dismissive.
Extremely.
Yeah.
Because knowing someone has transitioned doesn't change the fact that the widow is going home to an empty house.
Exactly. The empty chair is still there.
So does this text imply that this theological belief just magically erases the visceral, brutal pain of their physical absence?
It is a critical question.
Yeah.
And if this framework offered that kind of toxic positivity, it would be deeply psychologically damaging.
Yeah, it would just be gaslighting.
Exactly.
Accept.
But it doesn't do that. This Catholic perspective does not suggest that faith acts as an emotional anesthetic.
Okay.
It does not numb the pain, the sorrow of the physical separation, the empty chair at the dinner table, the overwhelming silence in the house. It is acknowledged as deeply, undeniably real and agonizing.
It doesn't bypass the pain at all.
Not at all. What this theology does is change the nature of the suffering.
How so?
It shifts the experience of grief from despair to hope, even while the sorrow remains incredibly intense.
Okay, let's break down the difference there.
Sure. Despair is the conviction that the loss is a permanent, meaningless void. Despair says, this is broken forever.
Right. It's unfixable.
Exactly. Hope, on the other hand, in this specific context, says, this is shattered right now, and the pain is immense. But this is not the final chapter of the story. So grief is entirely validated. But the despair, the hopelessness, is removed from the equation.
I see the distinction. It's almost like the difference between missing someone who had to move to the other side of the planet where you can't reach them versus mourning someone who has been completely wiped from existence.
That's a really good way to put it.
Because both scenarios cause immense pain, right? You still cry because they aren't in the room with you.
Of course. The tears are exactly the same.
But the quality of the pain is entirely different because one contains the possibility of a future and the other is just a dead end.
That is the precise psychological mechanism at play here.
Yeah.
And, that actually brings us perfectly to the next logical pillar of this framework.
Which is?
Well, if the soul survives and they're existing in this transitional, eternal state, what happens to the human connections?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
What happens to the love between a mother and a son or between spouses? Are those relationships simply dissolved into some sort of cosmic, impersonal energy?
That is the terrifying question, isn't it? Because so often death feels like a cord has just been violently cut.
Snipped right in half.
You spend decades building an intricate, profound connection with someone, and death feels like it takes a pair of scissors to that cord. But this document insists the connection is not severed at all.
It insists the exact opposite, actually.
Yeah.
The Catholic framework introduces the teachings on the resurrection of the body and eternal life.
Okay.
This isn't just about an isolated soul floating in solitary peace on a cloud somewhere. It is deeply rooted in the concept of ultimate reunion. Yes. The tradition teaches that those who live in faith will be reunited not only with God, but with one another. I refer to this concept as relational continuity.
Relational continuity. I like that phrase. So the bond survives the transition.
The bond absolutely survives. Death interrupts the physical manifestation of the relationship. Obviously, you can't hug them anymore,
No.
but it does not terminate the relationship itself.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. The connection remains fully intact. It is simply waiting to be transformed and resumed in a new, eternal context.
Let's really unpack what relational continuity does to the day-to-day psychology of someone who is grieving.
It changes everything.
Because if I believe a relationship is permanently severed by death, my entire orientation to that person has to look backward.
You're stuck in the past.
Exactly. I am essentially facing backward all the time. All I have are photographs and memories. My relationship with them is restricted entirely to nostalgia.
And nostalgia, while comforting in small doses, is ultimately static. It cannot grow.
Right, it's frozen in amber.
Yes. But if you introduce the promise of reunion, the mourner is suddenly given a forward-looking orientation.
Oh, that's so true.
You are not just looking over your shoulder at the past anymore. You're actually looking ahead to a definitive future.
It's like being thrust involuntarily into an extreme, absolute long-distance relationship.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, imagine your partner gets deployed to some unreachable location for an indeterminate amount of time.
A secret mission, maybe.
Right, and every normal method of communication is stripped away. You can't text them, you can't FaceTime, you can't hear their voice.
That sounds agonizing.
The physical distance is agonizing, but the actual reality of the relationship hasn't ended. You are still married.
Right. The vows are still valid.
The commitment is still there. You are just enduring the distance while anticipating the moment the deployment ends, and you are finally in the same room again.
That analogy captures the tension perfectly. The methods of interaction have changed entirely, which is, of course, the source of the immense sorrow.
Yeah, the quiet house.
But the reality of the relationship remains completely valid. The relationship status hasn't changed to former.
He's still active.
Exactly. The Catholic tradition treats the deceased not as a memory, but as an active participant in an ongoing eternal community.
But, that raises a very practical problem for me.
What's that?
If I am in an extreme long-distance relationship, the hardest part is the inability to do anything for the other person.
Oh, the helplessness.
Yes. I want to send a care package. I want to show my love through action. If the relationship with a deceased loved one is still active, how do we interact with them right now?
That's the key.
Because the source text doesn't just say, sit around and wait patiently, does it? It actually provides a specific mechanism for action.
It does. And this is where the theology meets profound psychological utility.
I love when that happens.
Right. The tradition introduces the active work of grief through prayer. The text explicitly encourages families to pray for the soul of the deceased. And this ties directly into a concept that is very specific to Catholic theology, the state of purgatory.
Okay, wait, we need to pause and really clear the air here.
I figured we might need to.
Because the word purgatory carries an immense amount of cultural baggage.
Oh, tons of it.
For a lot of people listening, that concept probably conjures up like medieval paintings or Dante's Inferno or Hollywood horror movies.
Fire and brimstone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's often misunderstood as this cosmic torture chamber or a punitive waiting room where God just arbitrarily punishes you before letting you into the good place.
A spiritual timeout.
Right. What does the actual theological text say about this? Because I imagine it is miles away from the pop culture caricature.
It is fundamentally different. The pop culture version is obsessed with punishment. But the theological reality, as outlined in the text, is obsessed with healing.
Healing.
Yes. Purgatory is explicitly defined as a state of purification.
Okay.
It is a transitionary phase for souls who are already destined for heaven. Their final destination is completely secure.
So they aren't in danger of going to hell.
Not at all. The ticket is punched, so to speak,
Yeah.
but they are not yet fully prepared to enter into the absolute purity of God's presence.
So it's not a punishment room.
No.
It's more like a spiritual decontamination chamber.
Or rehabilitation center.
Ooh, a rehab center. I like that.
Yeah.
Like, if you've been in a severe car accident, you don't go straight from the ICU to running a marathon.
Exactly, you'd collapse.
You go to physical therapy to heal the atrophied muscles.
Spiritual rehabilitation is an excellent way to frame it. It is a process of letting go of the remaining attachments to earthly flaws, or selfishness, or unresolved pain.
It makes sense. We all carry so much baggage.
We do. So it is a necessary healing process to prepare the soul for ultimate joy. And here is the crucial psychological turning point for the mourner.
Okay, what is it?
The teaching emphasizes that the living can actually assist the deceased in this healing process through their continued prayers.
Whoa, that is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
Because anyone who has, sat in a hospital room and watched someone they love slip away knows that the absolute worst part of grief, the part that literally suffocates you, is the profound helplessness.
The inability to act.
Yes, you are paralyzed. There is literally nothing you can do with your hands to fix the situation. You can't give them medicine. You can't ease their pain anymore.
And helplessness is the fast track to clinical depression and grief. It is the feeling of an absolute lack of agency.
You're just a bystander.
But this theological teaching on purgatory and prayer fundamentally neutralizes that helplessness. It assigns the grieving family a vital ongoing job.
A job. I love that.
Yes. Their prayers are framed as acts of love that provide real spiritual assistance to their loved one in rehab, so to speak.
It transforms the mourner from a passive victim who just had something terrible happen to them into an active participant in their loved one's continuing journey.
Exactly. It is spiritual teamwork. The text highlights the immense comfort families find in knowing their prayers actually matter.
They aren't just shouting into the void.
No, they aren't just reciting words to make themselves feel better. They are actively caring for the person who passed away.
Yeah.
It is the care package in your long-distance relationship analogy.
And this brings us to the necessity of tangible tools. Because, let's be real, when you are reeling from a loss, your brain is in an absolute fog.
You can barely remember your own name.
Exactly. You can't always spontaneously invent profound theological prayers. You need an anchor.
You need structure.
And the source material points out how resources like the funeral program site offer tangible structural support for this exact practice.
Right.
They provide the physical prayer cards, the structured liturgies, the actual tangible items that grieving families can hold in their hands to guide these acts of spiritual teamwork.
Which is so important.
It gives them the literal vocabulary to engage in this active, ongoing relationship when their own words just fail them.
That physical anchor is essential. Human beings are somatic creatures.
Somatic meaning related to the body.
Yes. We process invisible realities through visible, tangible means. Having a printed card or a beautifully structured booklet isn't just about aesthetics.
It's not just making it look nice.
No, it's about providing cognitive scaffolding for a mind that is currently collapsing under the weight of grief. It gives physical form to the spiritual action.
Which leads us perfectly into the next layer of this framework. We've been talking a lot about the internal mechanisms, the mental shift from termination to transition, the internal action of prayer.
The private stuff.
Right. But as you just said, we are physical creatures. We
Yeah.
need physical spaces to process these massive emotions. A private prayer in your bedroom is important, but there has to be a public communal container for the sorrow.
There has to be.
How does this tradition handle the sheer physical reality of a community in mourning?
Well, this brings us to the public rituals, specifically the funeral mass. And I really want to highlight something profound the text states right at the outset regarding this.
Okay, what does it say?
It says the grief is not something to be avoided or suppressed. It is explicitly acknowledged as a natural, deeply necessary human response to the rupture of death.
I think that is incredibly healthy and honestly quite countercultural right now.
No, extremely countercultural.
We live in a society that is deeply, deeply uncomfortable with negative emotion. We want people to stay strong or keep it together.
Don't make a scene.
Right. Don't cry in public. You're making everyone uncomfortable. But the tradition here doesn't demand that toxic stoicism. It doesn't say, well, they are in heaven now, so dry your tears.
That doesn't dismiss the human reality.
By explicitly stating that grief shouldn't be suppressed, the church is building a sanctioned, validated container for intense emotional pain. It essentially gives you permission to shatter in public.
It is a profound display of psychological wisdom. The Church recognizes that attempting to bypass the pain of loss only internalizes and calcifies the trauma,
You just end up burying it alive.
and it will come out later, usually in very destructive ways. You have to move through it. And the funeral mass serves as the central physical and temporal space where these chaotic emotions are given structure.
It's a safe zone.
It is. It's a highly choreographed ritual designed specifically to hold the pain of the community.
But, reading through the document, I found a massive paradox that I really want to challenge you on.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
The text describes the funeral mass as a profound time of mourning, right?
Yes.
But in the exact same breath, it calls it a celebration of the hope of resurrection.
Right, it does.
How can a single ritual realistically hold two completely opposing emotional states? Devastating, life-altering mourning on one hand and joyful celebration on the other. It feels like forcing those two things together would just create, emotional whiplash.
It is a paradox, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it is a necessary tension.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the ritual were entirely focused on mourning, it would drive the community into absolute despair. It would be too heavy.
Just a bottomless pit of sadness.
Exactly. But if it were entirely a celebration, it would be a delusional denial of the human reality of a broken heart.
It would feel fake.
Right. So the ritual holds these two opposing forces together by anchoring them in a central physical action, the Eucharist.
Let's break that down for the listener who might not be super familiar with the terminology. How does the Eucharist, the communion, bridge that emotional gap?
The text specifically refers to the Eucharist as providing spiritual nourishment.
Nourishment. Food.
Yes. Think about the sheer physical toll of grief. Mourning is exhausting.
Oh, it drains you completely.
It depletes your central nervous system. It burns calories. It physically drains you. You feel hollowed out.
You can barely stand up sometimes.
So the ritual of the Mass, culminating in the Eucharist, doesn't demand that the mourner magically switch their emotional state from sad to happy. That's impossible.
Right.
Instead, it provides the spiritual fuel required to endure the sadness.
Oh, wow. It's fuel for endurance, not a cure for the symptom.
Precisely. It feeds the soul so that the mourner has the stamina to carry the immense weight of the grief in one hand, while simultaneously clinging to the theological hope of the resurrection in the other.
That's a beautiful image, holding both at once.
It is an acknowledgement that you cannot survive this journey on your own strength. You need to be nourished.
That reframes the entire experience of a funeral for me. It's not a performance of grief.
No, not at all.
It's literally a refueling station for the long road ahead.
Exactly.
And a massive part of that endurance comes from the fact that you aren't forced to walk up to that refueling station alone.
Never alone.
The text places a massive emphasis on the people sitting in the pews right next to you. It argues that isolation is essentially the enemy of healing.
The sociology of grief is just as important as the theology in this framework.
Sociology, right, the community aspect.
When you suffer a profound loss, the immediate feeling is exile.
Exile, like you've been banished.
It feels like you have been deported to a desolate foreign country where no one speaks your language. And everyone else is just going about their normal lives, buying groceries and complaining about traffic while your universe has just ended.
Yes. You just want to scream, how are you buying milk right now? Don't you know the world is over?
It's so jarring. But the Catholic framework explicitly counters this profound social isolation with a built-in network of care.
The parish community. The text talks a lot about parish members, friends, and family coming together to offer support, prayers, and physical companionship.
They show up.
I visualize it like a giant physical safety net. Going back to our tightrope analogy from the very beginning, if the rope snaps and you fall and you have no community, you are in a free fall.
Plummeting.
You are trying to frantically weave a safety net out of nothing while plummeting toward the ground at terminal velocity.
Which is impossible.
That is impossible.
It is impossible, yet it is exactly what modern atomized society expects people to do.
Right. We're all so separated now.
We live in isolated nuclear families, or we live completely alone. And when tragedy strikes, we have no infrastructure to catch us. The brilliance of the parish model is that the safety net is already constructed.
It's already there before you fall.
It is already suspended, woven by generations of tradition, and ready to catch you before you ever take that first step onto the tightrope. You don't have to build a support system from scratch when you are at your absolute weakest.
I really want you, the listener, to think about this in the context of your own life for a second.
Yeah, consider your own safety nets.
Think about a time when you were hit by a severe hardship, maybe the loss of a loved one, or a terrifying medical diagnosis, or even a sudden job loss. How did the presence or the absolute absence of a structured, supportive community dictate your recovery?
It changes everything.
Having a group of people who simply show up, who don't try to fix it, who don't offer empty advice, but who just physically sit in the rubble with you, it changes the entire atmospheric pressure of the crisis.
Sitting in the rubble is the perfect way to phrase it.
It is the defining difference between surviving a tragedy and being permanently destroyed by it.
It dictates the entire trajectory of healing. And the text points out that this community doesn't just offer silent presence either. They engage in shared, active acts of remembrance.
Acts of remembrance, like what?
They tell stories, they gather for meals, they say the deceased name out loud.
Saying the name out loud is so crucial because there is often a real fear in secular circles of bringing up the deceased,
I
right?
think people are terrified of it.
People think, oh, I shouldn't mention her husband. It will just remind her and make her sad.
As if she forgot.
Exactly. The grief is already there. Not saying the name just makes the mourner feel like the person is being erased from history.
Exactly. The silence is what hurts. The Catholic tradition of collective remembrance actively fights that erasure.
By talking about them.
Yes. When an entire community gathers to talk about someone, to remember their impact, and to pray for their soul, it reinforces that theological belief we discussed in Section 1. The person still exists.
The transition, not termination.
Right. A communal affirmation of their life solidifies the reality of their ongoing, albeit transitioned, existence.
So we have these deeply ancient, grounded practices. Gathering in a physical church, breaking bread, telling stories, reciting prayers that have been whispered for literal centuries.
Very tactile, historical traditions.
But the source material does something really interesting toward the end. It doesn't just stay in the past.
No, it looks forward.
It acknowledges that while the human need to mourn is ancient, the tools we use to remember are constantly evolving.
The tradition is not a museum piece. That's a crucial point. It is a living, breathing framework that adapts to the present reality.
Okay.
The text specifically addresses modern practices, explicitly acknowledging the rise of digital memorials and online tributes.
Now, I want to push back on this quite a bit, actually.
Let's hear the pushback.
Because we've just spent all this time talking about the sacredness of the physical body, the somatic experience of the Eucharist, the physical presence of a community sitting in a wooden pew.
The tangible stuff, yes.
Doesn't introducing smartphones and URLs and digital memorials risk cheapening the solemnity of these ancient rites?
It's a very valid concern.
Does it turn a sacred ontological transition into just another piece of fleeting social media content to be swiped past? Like, sad, swipe up.
That is the precise danger, and it is exactly why the text includes a crucial caveat.
Which is?
It states that these digital tools can complement traditional practices only when used thoughtfully.
Thoughtfully.
That word thoughtfully is doing an immense amount of heavy lifting there. The objective is never to replace the tangible, physical gathering of the community or the sacred reality of the Mass with a sterile digital alternative.
Right. You can't replace the physical safety net with a virtual reality headset.
Exactly.
You can't digitally download spiritual nourishment.
Precisely. But what these digital tools can do, when integrated with reverence, is expand the canvas of remembrance.
Expand the canvas. I like that.
Let's go back to our long-distance relationship analogy.
Yeah.
If a community is a safety net, a digital memorial allows people who cannot physically be in that parish to still hold a piece of the net.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Consider a relative who lives across the globe, or maybe an elderly friend who is homebound and physically cannot attend the funeral mass.
They still need to grieve.
They do. And a thoughtfully created digital space gives them a venue to participate in the communal act of grief.
So it democratizes the grieving process for those separated by geography or circumstance.
Yes, exactly.
And this is, again, where the practical application comes in. The text mentions that resources like the funeral program site offer ways to integrate these modern elements respectfully.
Right. It's not just a free-for-all on a social media timeline.
It's about using the technology to serve the theology, not letting the technology dictate the terms of the grief.
It requires intentional design. A digital tribute, when curated with the same care as a physical memorial service, extends the reach of the community's prayers and shared stories.
It makes the safety net wider.
It is a modern iteration of an ancient impulse. For millennia, humanity has carved names into stone monuments to ensure permanence.
Right, obelisks and headstones.
Today, we are also carving those names into the digital landscape so that a globally dispersed community can collectively bear witness to a life. The medium changes, but the core human necessity remains identical. We must remember, and we must do it together.
That is a phenomenal synthesis.
Uh-huh.
Let's pull the lens all the way back now and look at the entire landscape we've traversed in this deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
We started with the premise that modern society often treats grief like a broken bone, a problem to be quickly set, casted, and cured. But we have traced how this ancient Catholic perspective completely re-architects that expectation.
It provides a cohesive, internally logical system for survival.
Yeah.
It starts at the very foundation by redefining death itself, moving it from a catastrophic termination of existence to a profound transition of the immortal soul.
It takes us out of the tomb and into the chrysalis. And by making that foundational shift, it secures our human connections. It promises relational continuity through the resurrection, meaning we are thrust into a temporary long-distance relationship, anticipating a joyful reunion, rather than mourning a permanent, irreversible severance.
And because that relationship is still active and ongoing, it fundamentally cures the paralyzing helplessness of grief.
By giving us a job to do.
Yes. It gives mourners a vital, active vocation, engaging in the spiritual teamwork of praying for souls in a state of purification, assisting them on their journey toward ultimate peace. It transforms passive, crushing despair into an active, enduring expression of love.
Furthermore, it doesn't try to sanitize the visceral human pain of the loss.
It lets the tears flow.
It provides a massive, validated physical container for sorrow within the funeral mass. It offers the Eucharist as tangible spiritual stamina to endure the exhaustion of weeping. And it surrounds the collapsing individual with a pre-built parish safety net so they never have to free fall alone.
Finally, it proves its resilience as a living tradition by thoughtfully incorporating the digital tools of the 21st century, ensuring that the ancient human need for collective remembrance can bridge modern geographic divides.
It is a staggering framework when you view it from end to end. The ultimate takeaway here, I think, is that faith, when properly applied, provides an unshakable sense of purpose during the most chaotic, disorienting moments of a human life.
It truly does.
It takes the darkest realities. It doesn't shy away from the tears, the empty chairs, or the anger. And it uses the bedrock conviction of eternal life as the foundation to transfigure pure sorrow into a navigable path toward healing.
It is a blueprint for enduring the unendurable.
It is. And for those looking to implement this blueprint in their darkest hours, the practical tools and guidance highlighted by the funeral program site offer a way to anchor these profound theological concepts into tangible, comforting realities.
It does not erase the grief, but it repurposes it. It insists that the love you feel and the pain of its interruption is not meaningless. It is part of a larger eternal continuity.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought.
Oh, I'm ready.
We have spent this entire time dissecting how this theological framework changes our relationship with people after they have transitioned out of this life.
Right, looking at the aftermath.
But turn that lens around for a moment. If we were to truly internalize this framework today, if we operated every single waking hour with the profound, unshakable conviction that our relationships with the people sitting next to us, the people we work with, the people in our families are literally eternal, how would that alter your reality?
That changes the math on everything.
If the bonds you are building right now are destined to continue far beyond the temporary span of biological life, how would that drastically change the way you speak to them, the way you forgive them, and the urgency with which you love them right now, today?
It raises the stakes of ordinary life to an eternal level. If a relationship is forever, a casual interaction is never truly casual.
Exactly. The implications are just staggering. Thank you for taking this depth dive with us. Keep exploring, keep challenging your paradigms, and keep seeking out the frameworks that help us illuminate the most profound depths of the human experience.